Uncle Ron and stuff. I think this is episode 20. In a previous episode, I talked about passwords, and a passing reference, I said that Wi-Fi, but I don't even use passwords on my Wi-Fi. And in my situation, that's probably okay. But thinking about it, if you live in a high density area like an apartment complex or where the houses are very close together, uh, there is some danger, not from hacking, there is some danger without a password on your Wi Fi that other people who don't have any regular Wi Fi connection, that means they don't have cable TV or they don't have a router in their house. If they were to see your signal on their cell phone or something else, they could in fact piggyback onto your Wi-Fi signal. And I said, so what? Well, most Wi-Fi, if you get from a cable company or from whoever you get it from, if you do have Wi-Fi, it usually has a total usage or band band limitation of how many gigabytes or whatever it is you can use per month. And if you leave it unprotected with no password, it is certainly possible that in an apartment complex, somebody on their cell phone could see your Wi-Fi unprotected with no password. They could get onto it and start using up data that is limited. And so all of a sudden you're getting a larger bill because you're using too much data or you don't have any data left to use for yourself. So in that situation, it's really handy to put a password on your Wi-Fi. Um, the other issue is like on cell phones, you could create what's called a hotspot. And I know people have done that. They have like a smart TV or they have something else. They have Wi-Fi service as part of their cellular package. They're allowed to do so much, so much of internet, if you will, from their cell phone. And because they have a smart TV or have something else in their home that there's no router there that provides that sort of Wi-Fi signal, they create a hotspot off their cell phone, and then their smart TV or whatever the other device it is can have access uh, to the internet Wi-Fi through that cell phone. Again, the issue there is that most plans for cell phones and other things have a data limit. So if you have just a cell phone, you create a hotspot, you're using it to feed a TV, and you start doing a lot of streaming, you're going to use up all of the data that you're allowed under your Wi-Fi plan. Okay, you got to be aware of that. And secondary issue: if you don't have a password on that Wi-Fi or on your cell phone, the Wi-Fi hotspot, then other people, like in an apartment complex, they could see that signal. They don't have any other thing. Like for the smart TV, might find your Wi-Fi signal. If it wasn't password protection, they could connect to it, start streaming, use up all your data, or you would be charged for that data. So in that case, you really do need to put a password on your Wi-Fi. Um, Again, where I live here, houses are scattered rather far apart. If I do a look, uh, see what networks are available, I can probably see 8, 9, 10. Um, Most all are password protected. And again, in my situation, yeah, it would be possible that somebody over there, someplace else, brings up their cell phone, uh, sees my open network, uses it to do streaming, and they could be using up the data I'm allowed by my uh, internet provider, which is a cable company for me, and run up, use all of my data allowed per month. So there is a risk associated with that. It's not one of hacking, it's just using up the data you're allowed. So uh, in high density populations, especially apartment buildings, not everybody has a cable company provided or otherwise provided router that gives them Wi-Fi, or they might have a minimum plan and only be allowed so much data per month, and it doesn't work all that well for their smart TVs or their other smart devices, and they might piggyback on you if you're not protected and use up all your data. So I have to correct myself. You need Wi-Fi passwords on any Wi-Fi signal you have, sort of depending on your location. Now I said Wi-Fi doesn't go very far, and it doesn't. Uh, in an apartment building, uh, if you did a look and see all the Wi-Fi signals, there could be a lot. Could be bunches and bunches and bunches of them. Seeing a signal is one thing. Making a solid connection to it is another. This all depends on antennas. Um, the antenna off of a router is maybe, I got an antenna maybe this tall or something. It's 5 inches, 6 inches tall. But the antennas in cell phones and smart TVs and other things like that, they could be like this big. Okay, so while they can receive you could see a signal from somebody else. It's a two-way communication, so you have to be able to push a signal back to make a connection. Okay, and with laptops, they have such a small antenna, and it's really small on a laptop. Even though you can see a network, you may not be able to reliably connect to it. So, uh, in the range thing I was talking about, again, and like an apartment complex, if you looked at all the Wi-Fi signals you could see, it could be a lot of them. If you try connecting to them, you may not make a connection because even though you're seeing them, you can't push enough signal back to establish a reliable connection. The FCC limits how much output power your cell phone, your router, your whatever it is, your wireless device can transmit. So even though your receiver is good enough to see the signal, your transmitting device, be it a cell phone or whatever it is, doesn't have enough power to make a reliable connection. And what happens, Ethernet and wireless and so on, uh, if they try a connection at a certain speed, uh, and there's all kind of speed standards on Wi-Fi, with the first one having to do with B, and that's the slowest Wi-Fi speed, and it turns out to be the longest distance, reliable distance. The slower the speed, it somewhat gets around the signal strength issue a little bit. So that's the most reliable, the B standard, 54 megabits per second. Okay. Uh, but above that, when you go to higher speeds, and like again, there's standards on those, um, you just don't have the transmit power at that level to make a reliable connection. But nonetheless, the whole point of this whole thing is that if you have a hotspot, you're using a cell phone as a hotspot to do internet stuff. for the devices in your home and you don't have a wireless router or anything connected to a cable company, you do have to password that. There's a possibility other people would see your net, connect to it, and start streaming off of it, streaming from HBO or something, and they run up and use up all your data. So I had to correct that. You do need passwords on your Wi-Fi in certain situations. And if you live out in the country and the nearest house is, a mile away, you can forget it. It isn't. They're not going to be able to connect to you. There are ways around that, of course. Again, it's antennas. I did try one time. My daughter was in a situation where there was no available Wi-Fi signals around her. They were all locked, couldn't get in, password protected. But about a mile and a half away was a hotel, and they provide free Wi-Fi service to all of their guests. And so I bought this big antenna, parabolic antenna, which focuses the signal. I pointed it at the hotel, and she could get Wi-Fi service by attaching on to the hotel. Uh, Receive was okay, transmit was not so good. Again, there's limitations on how much power output cell phones and every Wi-Fi device has. The antenna helped amplify that signal in a way. She could see it. It was spotty, but she could get Wi-Fi. It was spotty. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And we're talking about a mile and a half or so away. So there are ways around it. I have talked to people who lived on a farm and they wanted a reliable Wi-Fi signal in the barn, and the barn would be 100 yards away. And with an antenna at both ends, a good antenna, they could get reliable Wi-Fi connection. Um, so it is possible in that situation, and in that situation, because they were so far apart from everybody else, they didn't need to use a password, and they knew that there was nobody else to be able to attach on. And the antennas they used were highly directional, so the signal really wasn't available much out of a very small sort of cone from their house to the barn, more or less. But anyway, that's all I have on this. I wanted to clarify on passwords. If you have, especially if you're using a cell phone as a hotspot in your home, you definitely have to password that. And I suggest some password that it's not like 1 2 3 4. Don't do something so obvious that people could try various combinations that they're in and get in. That's all I got. I will talk about Wi-Fi in a future episode. There's a lot to Wi-Fi, and there's a lot of grumbling. People, it doesn't work like it's supposed to, and yeah. Wi-Fi is a headache. It's a blessing, but it's also a headache. And the more you understand about it, the less headache it can be. But I will talk about that in another episode. I think this is episode 20. Passwords on your Wi-Fi. Uh, yes, do that. I don't, but I suggest everybody else does. And it's mainly over data usage, your limitations that you get through your service provider in some way on how many megabytes or gigabytes a month you're allowed to get. And if other people piggyback on your signal, they could use up all your data or your bill could get high. That's the end of episode 20. Today is the 3rd of January in 2023. 2023 already. It was year 2000 like 5 minutes ago, and all of a sudden it's 2023. Enough for this one. I hope